Why don't you shut up? I paid double for first class, not daycare. Do something, Arriaga. The sharp voice of a VIP passenger echoed, wounding Emilio's ego like a sharp public slap. In that instant, Silicon Beach's most admired CEO, accustomed to silencing boardrooms with a look, found himself humiliated by the most primal, uncontrollable sound in life, his own son's cries. The luxurious Aeromexico 402 had become a torture chamber. The billionaire looked down, where Mateo was screaming, and up at the night sky outside, where there was no refuge from his powerlessness. Power couldn't buy peace. The sound erupted from the altitude, a high, shrill note that seemed to tear through the cabin lining. It was the cry of Mateo, the little heir of Emilio Arriaga, a tech billionaire and icon of Latino success in the U.S. Emilio, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and a wristwatch worth a car, was completely disoriented. He held his son with nervous rigidity, trying logical formulas to silence the baby's despair, but the algorithm failed miserably. The businessman who built digital empires was powerless in the face of the essential. The first-class cabin murmured. Disapproving looks were fired like icy darts at Emilio and the flight attendant, who tried to mask her discomfort with weak smiles and futile offers of blankets. Emilio's shame was tangible. It was a weight that made him shrink back into the expensive leather seat. His image as a man who had everything under control, his pride in being the face of success in Los Angeles and Mexico City, was crumbling with each scream from his son. His reign, on that plane, was chaos. Frustration reached a peak. Emilio tried the bottle, the rocking, the reassuring words he used to close deals. But the baby cried louder, as if rejecting the coldness of the method. The crying was a barometer of Emilio's desperation, a measure of his inability to connect with the purity and basic need of love. Money could buy the silence of his critics, but never the calm of a small soul. That sound was the soundtrack to his emotional bankruptcy. He closed his eyes, willing the landing to come faster than the speed of sound. The internal turbulence was worse than atmospheric turbulence. The contrast between his life in Silicon Beach, full of data, efficiency, and control, and the chaotic scene he found himself in was brutal. Control, his greatest weapon, had no jurisdiction here. It was a cruel reminder that for all his successes, he had neglected the most vital aspect of life. He was a stranger to his own son. Humiliation seemed to permeate the air. He felt the judgment of every passenger, the silent fury that came from those who had paid dearly for peace and received a concert of lamentations. The man who dominated the Latin American technology market was being dominated by a months-old baby. It was a devastating irony that pinned him to his seat. Paralyzed. He wished for a moment he could negotiate peace, offer a fortune to stop the crying. But Mateo's heart was not for sale. Suddenly, a movement in the back of the plane, in economy class, caught his attention. It wasn't the hurried flight attendant, nor another irritated passenger. It was something slower, more deliberate, breaking the lines of social class and confusion. Emilio's gaze followed the approaching figure, an unlikely figure that held a subtle promise of change. He didn't know what to expect, but anything would be better than the current agony. Emilio's despair was as deep as the ocean beneath the aircraft. He was exhausted, defeated. In that moment of surrender, a thought came to him, bitter and true. In that moment, the man who owned everything realized he couldn't handle the essential thing: love. He could code software to connect millions, but he couldn't calm the heart of his firstborn. Mateo's crying was his most glaring system failure. The approaching figure was a boy. His features were soft, and his eyes, incredibly expressive and gentle, fixed on Mateo with immediate compassion. His face radiated a peace that was missing from the entire plane, especially from Emilio. The boy walked with a slight hesitation, but his purpose was clear. He didn't seem intimidated by the crying, nor by the stares of dozens of strangers. Emilio, speechless, simply nodded as the boy stopped beside him, a tacit permission, the last shred of hope from a defeated father. Surrendering his son to the unknown was an act of pure desolation and desperate faith. Mateo's weeping seemed to grow louder before an almost sacred silence fell over the aircraft, a harbinger of what was to come. If you're feeling as powerless as Emilio, lost in the noise of life and searching for a deeper connection, this story of humanity and rediscovery is for you. Follow Santiago's journey and discover how silence can be the strongest voice. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters and all the life lessons they offer. Stillness is the only sound that truly soothes the soul. Little Santiago stopped beside Emilio's seat, the cabin light highlighting the purity of his face. His presence wasn't imposing, but it had a gravity that instantly distracted attention from the crying. He was the antithesis of the reigning chaos. His eyes, large and luminous, looked at Mateo without judgment, only with tender and absolute curiosity. Silence then began to form, not by force, but by attraction. Everyone sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen at the center of that aerial drama. With a shy but confident gesture, Santiago extended his arms. Emilio, paralyzed by surprise and exhaustion, handed Mateo over. It was an unthinking act, a tycoon's surrender to the simple touch of a child. As soon as the baby felt the warmth and softness of Santiago's arms, his crying began to subside, like a storm finding its calming eye. The tension in the cabin, previously palpable, began to dissipate, replaced by collective astonishment. The boy with Down syndrome, who spoke little, demonstrated an eloquence of touch that surpassed years of corporate communication. He didn't rock the baby in haste or nervousness. Instead, he began a light massage on the back of Mateo's neck, a circular, instinctive movement, accompanied by a soft babbling, almost a musical murmur that seemed to come from within. It was a sound that didn't attempt to silence, but rather to speak to the pain. Santiago's technique was a dance of gentle gestures. He held the baby lightly against his chest, allowing Mateo to hear the rhythmic beating of his heart. The murmur was wordless, but full of intention, soft notes reminiscent of the sound of breathing, or perhaps the forgotten harmony of the womb. The sound was not a noise, but a frequency, a tune that the baby recognized and accepted instantly. The passengers, once impatient and irritated, were now a captivated audience. Wall Street businessmen, tourists from Los Angeles, all watched the miracle unfold in the first-class aisle. The improbable had happened. The boy society often marginalizes was offering the most effective and pure remedy for the chaos of modern life. The purity of Santiago overcame the noise and complaints. Emilio watched the scene, breath held, tears welling in his eyes. The sight of his son, whom he couldn't calm with all his might, nestled peacefully in Santiago's arms, was a revelation. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't science. It was pure and simple. Empathy in action. The billionaire realized there was something his money and analytical intelligence could never replicate, the innate ability to comfort. The final sound of Mateo's cry dissolved into a long, deep sigh, a sign of surrender and sleep. The baby's face, previously contorted, relaxed into an expression of complete peace. Santiago rocked him gently, his eyes fixed on the baby's serene expression, a small, almost imperceptible smile curving his lips. He had brought calm back to the heavens, restoring order in a way no one expected. Aeromexico cabin 402, previously filled with complaints, was now almost religiously silent. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a stillness charged with meaning, a pause that allowed everyone to process the beauty of the moment. The silence was a tribute to that boy, to his humanity, and to the power of his presence. What fear couldn't silence, tenderness pacified. The flight attendant returned, not to offer an apology, but to observe, her eyes welling up. Emilio's pride, once wounded, began to be replaced by something deeper: gratitude and a burning curiosity about the identity of this little peacemaker. The silence, indeed, was the most beautiful sound Emilio had ever heard, because it was the sound of his momentary redemption. The silence was so complete that it allowed Emilio to hear himself for the first time in a long time, confronting his emotional aridity. The boy, without saying a word about technology or finance, had taught him a life lesson worth more than all his assets. Mateo's vulnerability and Santiago's purity were rewriting the script of his existence, mid-flight to Los Angeles. If you're also touched by this story of purity and human power and believe in the power of simple love, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like and activate the bell to see how this unlikely encounter will change Emilio and Santiago's world. Curiosity and gratitude mingled in Emilio's gaze. He observed Santiago, the miracle of empathy still holding Mateo, and knew he couldn't let that moment fade into routine. His analytical mind, accustomed to deciphering complex data, now tried to unravel the mystery of that calming touch. Who was this boy who had broken the control of a billionaire and, more importantly, the chaos of a baby? The businessman leaned in, speaking in polished Spanish that contrasted with the simplicity of the situation, searching for the roots of that rare humanity. He needed answers to this phenomenon. Santiago's mother, Rosa Morales, was in her economy class seat, watching the scene with a mixture of pride and humility. Emilio invited her to join him, and there, in the aisle between classes, Santiago's story began to unfold. Rosa was a cleaning lady, a strong woman of faith, traveling with her son to an important event, an international presentation of the foundation, down to Dream in Los Angeles. Their life was in Nezahualcóyotl, or Neza, as everyone called it, a neighborhood on the outskirts of Mexico City, noisy, vibrant, and full of struggle. Far from the sterile silence and luxury of the Santa Monica mansions. The contrast between the worlds could not be greater, but Rosa spoke of Neza fondly, as the place where Santiago's heart learned to love music amidst the constant noise. Santiago, now awake and calm, had a head full of unusual dreams. Rosa revealed that he loved music and mathematics with a surprising passion. "He says music has the logic of numbers, and numbers, the rhythm of the heart, Mr. Arriaga," she said, a smile lighting up her tired face. The boy saw the world through a lens that combined art with precision, something that deeply intrigued the tech mogul. Emilio realized that that boy was not defined by his syndrome, but by his extraordinary sensitivity. He was a catalyst of calm, a human sensor of emotions. For a man who built software to optimize life, Santiago was the most beautiful and functional human flaw he had ever encountered. He saw in him not a limitation, but unusual mind and one extraordinary heart. The conversation continued as the plane approached landing. Rosa spoke of the challenges and joys of raising a son who saw the world so uniquely, facing daily prejudice with resilience and faith. She asked for nothing, simply expressed gratitude for the chance to take her son to showcase his talent. Rosa's dignity and Santiago's innocence touched a chord Emilio thought was rusty, his own humanity. Emilio's curiosity was no longer that of a businessman analyzing a product, but that of a man finding an essential piece missing in his own life. He inquired further about the foundation, about Santiago's passion for harmonies and geometries, trying to understand how a boy from Neza could be so attuned to the human soul. He sensed that the cold logic of Los Angeles desperately needed the warmth of Mexico. The morning light began to filter into the cabin. Emilio felt a growing need to reciprocate, not with money, but with genuine attention. He offered Rosa and Santiago more comfortable transportation to the event in L.A., something Rosa accepted gratefully, but without exploitation. Her reluctance to accept help from a billionaire was, to Emilio, a sign of rare integrity. He saw in Santiago a connection missing in his world of screens and codes. The boy was a paradox. He spoke little, but his presence communicated volumes. It was proof that the intelligence of the heart far surpassed the artificial intelligence Emilio so valued. That encounter wasn't just about a silenced cry. It was about an awakening. The plane finally touched down in Los Angeles. The world of Silicon Beach and Nazas were now connected by the airport floor and a sleeping baby. Emilio felt the weight of responsibility, not of business, but of protecting that small flame of purity that had illuminated his flight. Disembarkation promised separation, but he sensed fate had other plans. The lesson was clear. Life was not about controlling, but about feeling. The magnetism of an imminent goodbye. At the arrivals gate at LAX, the California sun bathed the scene in a cinematic light. Rosa thanked Emilio with a sincerity that disarmed him. "You were very kind to my son, Arriaga," she said, the emotion in her voice the most valuable payment he had ever received. The businessman nodded, feeling strangely naked without the shield of his corporate routine. He held Mateo, who was awake but serene. The baby smiled at the sight of Santiago, a pure, irresistible smile that only innocence can give, and clung to Emilio's lap, refusing to accept that his peacemaker was leaving. Mateo stretched out his arms toward Santiago, a silent protest against the separation. It was the confirmation of an inexplicable link, an affinity born from the serendipity of a flight. Emilio tried to calm the baby, but Mateo's rejection of his touch, after having accepted Santiago's calm, was a subtle blow to his pride and a confirmation of his parenting clumsiness. He realized his son sensed the difference between anxiety and peace. The moment stretched on, uncomfortable and beautiful. Rosa hurried, worried about her connecting flight to the hotel. Santiago, with the same calm with which he had soothed Mateo, lightly touched the baby's face, a farewell caress. His eyes met Emilio's, a silent communication that carried more meaning than any speech. Keynote. Before turning his back, Santiago, who spoke in short, direct sentences, uttered a phrase that would sound like a riddle to the businessman. "If you want Mateo to go back to sleep, sing to him. Not with your mouth, but with your heart." Santiago's voice was soft, but the message echoed in Emilio's mind like a thunderbolt. What did he mean by singing from the heart? The phrase haunted him as he watched Rosa and Santiago walk away into the airport crowd. It was a metaphor, he knew, but one that defied all his business logic. As a man whose life was governed by spreadsheets, profits, and tangible results, was he supposed to interpret such an abstract instruction? Santiago's purity had sown a seed of doubt in the aridity of his soul. Emilio felt something inexplicable, a force that prevented him from simply returning to his routine. It wasn't charity or social obligation. It was a link born by chance, a connection of souls. He had witnessed a small personal miracle, and the idea of forgetting Santiago and Rosa felt like a betrayal of that new emotion he could barely name. It was the feeling of having seen something real for the first time. He headed to his limousine, the smell of leather and the coolness of the air conditioning contrasting with the warmth of Santiago's touch. On the way to his Santa Monica mansion, he called his assistant, but not to discuss meetings or stocks. He instructed her to discreetly find information about the foundation, down to dream and somehow get the Morales family's contact information. He couldn't explain why, but he felt he needed that boy. The businessman, who had always valued efficiency and control, now felt the weight of humanity in his life. Mateo, in his arms, was quiet now, but the stillness was fragile, a truce that depended on a connection he didn't have. Mateo's crying was a symptom, and Santiago was the only known antidote. He needed to decipher the heart's code. Santiago's phrase, "Sing to him, not with your mouth, but with your heart," was a constant thorn in his side. He realized he needed a frequency change, a new way of communicating with her son and the world. Neza's path to Santa Monica was more than a geographical distance. It was a journey from pragmatism to sensitivity. Emilio finally arrived at his glass and steel fortress. He stepped into his home, a billionaire carrying his son, but feeling poorer and more helpless than ever. The baby's cries had fallen silent on the plain, but the silence of his own heart was about to be disturbed by a new and unexpected melody, coming from a boy he barely knew. Don't miss the moment Emilio has to confront his own failure and seek help in the most unlikely place. Subscribe to the channel now and discover how Santiago's phrase will forever change the life of one of the richest men in the world. What does it mean to sing from the heart? Routine is a false balm. Back in the sterile luxury of Santa Monica, Emilio desperately tried to resume his life of meetings, analysis, and profits. But the silence of his home was more deafening than the wailing of the plane. He sat in front of his laptop, but the numbers seemed blurry, and Santiago's voice echoed louder than any audio conference. The trauma of Mateo's crying returned, however, every night with a vengeance. The baby, once calm, now screamed at the top of his lungs, reintroducing chaos into the fortress of control. No babysitter, no matter how expensive or qualified, could calm the baby. Relaxation techniques failed. Toys were more high-tech where rejected. Mateo's crying was a biological clock of impotence Emilio's, a constant reminder of his inability to connect. He paced the house like a ghost, exhausted, as the tranquility he'd experienced on the plane became a distant and painful memory. Camila, his wife, an elegant and practical woman, was at the end of her tether, but her pragmatism began to crack in the face of her son's suffering. She watched Emilio, her husband who dominated markets, now staggering with the baby in his arms, and the craziest, most intuitive idea came to her. It was the kind of suggestion she would never have made under normal circumstances, but desperation demanded radical measures. "Emilio," she began, her voice low but firm. "What if you called that boy? He had something special. I saw the way he looked at Mateo. I saw the peace he brought." The suggestion was a slap in the face to Emilio's reason. Calling a boy Neza, a boy with special needs, to solve a problem that money couldn't solve? The pride Emilio revolted. He, the magnate, asking for help from a cleaning lady and her son. It was an affront to his status, but as he looked at Mateo's pale, tired face, his pride crumbled. He had promised himself he would do whatever it took for his son, and Camila's voice was the mirror of his only hope. Santiago's phrase, "Sing with your heart," was the key. Reluctantly, Emilio sought contact with Rosa Morales. He hesitated before dialing, sensing the magnitude of what he was about to do, admit total defeat, and seek salvation in a world he barely understood. He, who controlled millions in negotiations, felt his palms sweat as he dialed a humble Mexican mother. The reversal of power was complete and humiliating. The call was made. Rosa, who was in a modest hotel in Los Angeles, heard the billionaire's trembling voice and, with her innate wisdom, sensed his desperation. Emilio didn't ask for a favor. He begged for help. He explained the crisis, the ineffectiveness of the nannies, the return of the crying. Rosa, with the dignity that defined her, accepted the invitation for her and Santiago to visit the mansion for a weekend. The billionaire hung up, feeling a sense of relief mixed with strangeness. His home, a masterpiece of minimalist design, cold and filled with silence, was about to receive Neza's warmth and simplicity. He was trading the efficiency of technology for the purity of sensitivity. The weekend promised to be a culture shock, but also their only chance for peace. Emilio prepared the house, not for a VIP investor, but for a guest who brought hope. He cleared his schedule, ignoring important calls. His priority had shifted. It was no longer profit, but well-being of his son. The prospect of seeing Santiago again brought him a calm that no reunion had ever given him. He was on the path to surrender. The wait for the weekend felt like an eternity. Emilio stared at the front door, the same one he'd seen prominent figures from the business world, anxiously awaiting the arrival of a boy he'd met on a flight, a boy with Down syndrome, who was now his only hope. It was a recognition that the solution to life rarely lies in the obvious places. He was ready for the lesson, ready to learn with your heart. The silence of his Santa Monica home was about to be shattered by a melody of empathy and innocence. The LA billionaire was at the mercy of Neza's boy. Simplicity disarms arrogance. The Santa Monica mansion seemed to hold its breath as Santiago and Rosa Morales crossed the threshold. The warm Southern California light streaming through the glass windows reflected the purity these two brought from Neza. The contrast between the cold opulence of the house and the warm humility of their visitors was a visual shock. Emilio and Camila watched anxiously. The acid test was about to begin. Would the miracle of the plane be repeated on dry land? Santiago's gaze met Mateo's, and the miracle was present. As soon as Santiago entered the living room, Mateo's crying stopped. The baby, who had been restless in his crib, turned his head and smiled to Santiago. It was a smile of recognition, a warm greeting between two souls. The connection was instantaneous and profound. Mateo nestled into the boy's arms with the ease of someone finding a safe haven, demonstrating that the peace Santiago brought was a frequency that he could feel. Camila, eyes wide, watched every movement. Santiago wasn't trying to please or impress, he simply was. He began to hum simple notes, a guttural sound, almost a soft babble, which seemed to mimic the sounds of the mother's womb. The sound wasn't music, but rather a vibration, a primal melody of comfort and security. The baby, enveloped by that aura of sound, closed his eyes. The scene was overwhelming. Within minutes, Mateo was fast asleep, his breathing calm and rhythmic. It was the first time in weeks the house had experienced a true silence, a peace that wasn't forced or temporary. Emilio leaned against the wall, feeling a wave of emotion that nearly made him stagger. That moment was worth more than all his fortune and all his power. It was proof that love was the most valuable currency. The miracle of empathy was there, visible. Santiago hadn't used technology, wealth, or tricks. He used the one thing Emilio had forgotten, sensitivity. He had the gift of seeing and feeling what the baby needed, of tuning into his pain. Emilio's money had failed, but Santiago's purity had triumphed, bringing peace where there was despair. Emilio, unable to contain his emotion, approached Rosa, his voice breaking. "Rosa, this is what even my money couldn't buy. This is peace." His confession was a total surrender. He was open to learning, ready to embrace the simplicity that was so lacking in his life. The barrier between the billionaire and the cleaning lady was beginning to crumble. Faced with success and the restored peace, Emilio made a proposal that Santiago and Rosa stay for a few more days, until the foundation event. Not as employees, but as honored guests, as the only ones capable of maintaining balance in the house. Rosa hesitated, feeling the weight of the class difference, but the silent plea in Emilio's eyes convinced her. The days that followed were surprisingly beautiful. The house, once a temple of cold minimalism, filled with life. Santiago's laughter, Rosa's calm voice, and most importantly, them calm, Mateo's songs were the new soundtrack. Emilio and Camila watched the boy, realizing that the solution to his crisis wasn't external, but rather the change in perspective that Santiago offered. Emilio began to take an interest in the way Santiago interacted with the baby, trying to decipher what code of tenderness. He noticed that Santiago was not trying, check the crying, but yes, welcome him, transforming anxiety into security. This lesson was more valuable than any advice from Coach Business. He was learning to be a father, not a businessman. Santiago's presence was a balm. He not only calmed Mateo, but also Emilio's soul, forcing him to slow down and appreciate the simplicity. The peace he sought in meetings and profits was in the arms of a boy society tended to ignore. The billionaire was in his own home, but he felt like a humble student. Camilla, she looked at her husband, watching the tension ease from his shoulders. She knew this boy was more than a caregiver. He was a teacher. The weekend, which began as a favor, was turning into a journey of rediscovery for the Arriaga family. The house of silence now held the soft, harmonious sound of life. The world isn't just made of data. Living with Santiago transformed the Santa Monica mansion into a school of sensitivity. For Emilio, the man of reason and numbers, the boy was a delightful and challenging enigma. He watched him as Santiago played with Mateo or drew complex geometric shapes on paper, associating them with melodies he hummed. Emilio, accustomed to deciphering financial statements, now tried to understand the intrinsic logic of the human soul. It was a silent revolution in his hyper-rational mind. The businessman felt emotionally illiterate. Santiago had asynesthesia unique, a singular way of processing the world that went beyond ordinary vision. "Music is mathematics with a heart," he explained one day to an astonished Emilio, showing how the colors in his drawing followed the proportions of a harmonic sequence. For Santiago, sounds were colors, emotions were numbers, and life was an elegant equation that just needed more heat. Emilio, one expert in coding and logic software, began recording Santiago's observations, fascinated by the clarity of his perception. Where Emilio saw chaos, Santiago saw rhythmic structure of life. He realized that Santiago's value lay not in his ability to conform to the world, but in his ability to see the underlying truth that the rational world ignored. His unusual mind was, in fact, an evolutionary advantage. The house was filled with a lightness that had long since disappeared. Mateo slept well, and Camilla's mood improved exponentially. Emilio, forced to slow down and listen with your heart, began to notice the colors of the sunset, the sound of the wind in the palm trees, the harmony of the details that haste had stolen. He was relearning the value of sensitivity. The most profound lesson came in the way Santiago related to emotions. He didn't repress or judge them. He named them with the precision of a scientist and the tenderness of a poet. "Mateo's tears are dark blue, Mr. Arriaga," he said. "It's the color of longing. It only changes to the yellow of peace when he feels safe." Emilio realized that security wasn't synonymous with wealth, but with presence. Emilio began to unconsciously apply Santiago's logic to his interactions. He listened more, spoke less, and tried to feel the color of his own emotions and those of the people around him. His rationality began to mix with the intuition, creating a new form of leadership and fatherhood. He was discovering the beauty of integration. The difference between life in Neza and Santa Monica seemed smaller, as the humanity Santiago brought transcended the social divide. Rosa watched her son and Emilio interact, realizing that their meeting was no coincidence. It was a bridge built by mutual need. The billionaire needed a heart, the boy, a platform for his voice. Santiago, with his innocence and emotional intelligence, had unraveled the mystery that all of Emilio's consultants had failed to solve: the importance of authentic human connection. He had taught Emilio that true innovation lay in seeing the world through lenses that combined the precision of mathematics with the art of emotion. The days of coexistence were a dive into sophisticated simplicity. Emilio saw the world through a new filter, realizing that his life, previously focused on creating intelligent machines, urgently needed more emotional intelligence. Neza's boy was rewriting the software interior of the LA magnate. Peace in their home was a gift, and that gift was named Santiago Morales, a boy with the ability to see beauty where the world saw flaws. The routine was changing, and the seed of inspiration was about to blossom on the Los Angeles stage. Silence is the canvas. Art is the voice. The night of the Down to Dream Foundation event arrived, lighting up the Microsoft Theater in downtown LA. It was the culmination of Santiago's journey, the original reason for his coming to the United States. Lobby was full of CEOs, investors, influencers, and journalists, the ideal stage for the transformation that was to come. Emilio and Camilla were there, not as distant benefactors, but as proud parents, waiting for their private tutor to shine before the world. The tension was palpable, but Santiago radiated an ethereal calm. On stage, other neurodivergent young people performed, showcasing their unique talents, but anticipation grew for the highlight. Santiago entered, small and serene, next to his colorful keyboard. He was dressed simply, but his presence carried a gravity that silenced the audience. He represented not only the foundation, but the hope that difference was, in fact, a strength. When he began playing, music wasn't just a succession of notes, it was a narrative. He blended complex harmonies based on his mathematics of the heart, with geometric projections on the screen that reacted in real time to the sound of his voice. The audience saw not just a performance, but the visual and auditory translation of his synesthetic mind. Sound and color danced in perfect harmony. Santiago's voice, soft and melodic, sang about the beauty of numbers and the simplicity of love. He was telling his story, the story of his unique way of seeing the world unapologetically. The music was pure and complex, a reminder that the ability to feel and create knew no boundaries. The audience was mesmerized by the union of art and logic. Emilio was in the audience, sitting next to Camila, and he couldn't hold back the tears. They were tears of shame, redemption, and overwhelming pride. He cried because he saw his son, Mateo, who was in Camila's arms, completely hypnotized by the music. He was crying because the boy he tried to ignore on the plane was the most you knew that he had already known. The audience, made up of rational minds from the business world, rose to their feet in applause. CEOs, investors, and journalists gave a standing ovation, touched by the undeniable truth that emanated from the stage. It wasn't charity that moved them, but beauty and innovation. They saw in Santiago not a symbol, but a creative genius. The world was witnessing a revolution of empathy. The moment was crystal clear to Emilio. He realized that Santiago's sensitivity was an invaluable asset. That boy held the key to communication that went beyond words and logic. His mind, which saw patterns in emotions, was the human algorithm most efficient he had ever encountered. Something was about to change, not only in his family's life, but in his business. He looked at Rosa, who smiled with the humility of someone who already knew her son's worth. Her pride was serene, the joy of seeing Santiago's purity recognized. The Microsoft Theater stage had been transformed into a platform of inclusion, and Santiago was its most eloquent ambassador. The plane's tears had culminated in a standing ovation. The impact. The excitement of the show was immediate. Journalists crowded around, asking about the technique, the inspiration, the foundation. Emilio felt a surge of creative energy, a spark that ignited in his mind a project with the potential to change the world, using Santiago's unique vision. He didn't just want to help, he wanted collaborate. Emilio, the tech billionaire, saw the perfect fusion between mathematics of Santiago and his own experience in software. The baby's cry, the boy's touch, and the foundation's concert all came together in a single purpose. The seed of a new project was germinating in the heart of Silicon Beach, inspired by a boy from Neza. The applause silenced the skepticism. A new project is being born, blending technology and heart, to change the lives of millions. Want to know how Santiago's genius will become a global app? Subscribe to the channel now and discover the most exciting game changer in this story. Vision becomes purpose. In backstage, at the Microsoft Theater, the fervor of the ovation still hung in the air. Emilio approached Rosa and Santiago with an intensity she had never seen before. He was no longer the distant businessman. He was a man with a newfound mission. His mind, accustomed to designing mass-market technologies, was now fully focused on an idea inspired by Santiago's synesthetic mind. He saw the software not as a tool for profit, but as a vehicle for humanity. "Rosa, what I saw today is the key," he began, his voice low and urgent. "The way Santiago unites music and logic, his synesthesia. We can turn it into a tool, one that teaches thousands of children with intellectual disabilities to connect with the world." Emilio's proposal was to create an educational application that used music, rhythm, and artificial intelligence, AI, to teach logic and coordination. He proposed to Rosa and Santiago that they participate not as sources of inspiration, but as symbolic co-founders of the project. He wanted Santiago's DNA to be at the root of the software, ensuring that its purity and vision were maintained. The boy's name would be the soul of the project, a constant reminder that the greatest intelligence is emotional. Rosa hesitated, shaken by the magnitude of the proposal. "Mr. Arriaga, we are not like you. We don't understand apps nor finance. We're from NASA," she said, her humility mixed with a subtle fear of that world of giants. The difference between her life as a cleaner and Emilio's world of technology was a chasm that frightened her. Emilio looked at her with a sincerity that disarmed her. "You are exactly what the world needs, Rosa. You bring pureza that technology has lost. I give the code, but Santiago gives the song. We need your authenticity so that this project is real and not just another product." It was an admission that his success needed a dose of soul. Santiago, who had been listening to the conversation, smiled. He looked at Emilio and said, with characteristic clarity, "The app needs the color yellow, Mr. Arriaga, the color of safety." His contribution was immediate, intuitive, and irrefutable. The color of love and peace would be the pillar of the project, injecting sensitivity into the machine. Emilio's vision was ambitious. The app would be free or low cost in Latin America, with a version premium for the American market, ensuring sustainability and global access. It was a business model with social purpose, which ironically promised to be more profitable because it was, first and foremost, human. Rosa, touched by the integrity of the proposal and Emilio's genuine desire, accepted. Not for the money, but for the opportunity to give voice and hope to thousands of children like her son. The boy who silenced the baby's cries was about to silence prejudice and open a new path for inclusion. Emilio's team was immediately mobilized. The creation of App started with the mind of Santiago at the center of the process, its singular logic becoming the basis of the code. The billionaire and the boy, the brain and the heart, formed the most unlikely and powerful partnership in Silicon Beach. The seed had been planted. Technology, once cold and purely rational, was gaining a Mexican soul, a rhythm that came from the outskirts of Mexico City. Santiago's journey of inclusion was about to go global. Contrast defines truth. Days after the ovation at the Microsoft Theater and the birth of the project, Rosa and Santiago returned to NASA. Their return to the outskirts of Mexico City was not that of a cleaning lady and her son, but of heroes. Neighborhood children surrounded them on the dirt road, asking Santiago to play his color music, proof that his fame had crossed borders. He was home, but his world was bigger. A visit from Emilio and Camila Neza was a shock of reality. The Santa Monica mansion couldn't have been further from the Morales' simple home, where street life took place and the noise was constant but welcoming. Emilio, accustomed to walking on Persian rugs, walked over the uneven concrete, inhaling the dust and the smell of home-cooked food. His corporate armor began to give way. In that simple and vibrant neighborhood, the businessman saw the true luxury, The strong social fabric, the unconditional tenderness of a mother, the unwavering faith in better days, and the love that didn't depend on bank accounts. What it lacked in resources, it made up for inhumanity and warmth. Emilio understood that the wealth he possessed was only material. What they had was the wealth of the spirit. He watched Santiago play with the other children, sharing his unique worldview, and understood the depth of the lesson. Material poverty did not diminish the richness of the soul. True luxury was the ability to connect and love without reservation. Her own home, with all its quiet luxury, seemed empty compared to the vibrancy of that place. The meeting in Neza cemented the social purpose of Emilio. He didn't just want to make a app, he wanted to plant seeds of opportunity. He made an immediate decision to finance the construction of an accessible community learning center in Neza, a safe space where music, math, and technology could come together to empower children with disabilities. Rosa's reaction was pure emotion. Tears welled up as she watched the billionaire, the man she'd met through a cry, investing in her community. Not for marketing purposes, but out of genuine conviction. The center would be named after Santiago, a beacon of hope and inclusion in the heart of Mexico's periphery. Emilio, who had spent his life building companies in digital lands, was now building something tangible and human on Mexican soil. He felt a satisfaction that millions in profit couldn't buy. It was building a legacy of heart, not just capital. The LA businessman was being rechristened Neza. He spoke with Santiago, who was sketching the center's layout in a notebook, using colors to designate the rooms. "The center has to be green, Mr. Arriaga. It's the color of hope," the boy said. His vision wasn't just architectural, but emotional. Returning to Neza had brought Emilio's transformation full circle. He had left the man he was in LA and, on the dusty streets of Mexico, found the man he was meant to be. The project app and the community center were the fruit of a turbulent flight and a silenced cry. The founding of the community center is a milestone, but the path to inclusion isn't always easy. Are you ready to see how Santiago's project will be attacked by prejudice? Sign up now to discover Santiago's powerful speech that will silence critics in the next chapter. Success is more annoying than failure. The launch of the project app and the news of the community center's funding generated a wave of media attention, celebrating the partnership between Silicon Beach and the outskirts of CDMX. But where there is light, the shadow of prejudice inevitably looms. The story of Santiago, the boy with Down syndrome at the center of a high-tech project, became an easy target for skepticism and judgment from those who saw inclusion as a threat or a mere marketing strategy. Some investors, Emilio's long-term partners, wedded to the cold logic of maximum return, began to publicly criticize the initiative. They claimed that the project was a misuse of resources and that Emilio was using Santiago as an advertising symbol to clean up its corporate image. The murmur that the disability was a risk or a limitation began to circulate in LA financial circles. The crisis peaked during a press conference in San Francisco, where Emilio presented the concept of app. The atmosphere was tense. Amidst the questions about AI and business models, a reporter with a veiled tone of sarcasm asked the question that had been hanging in the air. "Why invest in someone with cognitive limitations, Mr. Arriaga? Isn't that too great a risk for your shareholders?" The auditorium fell silent, awaiting Emilio's response. The businessman took a deep breath, about to give a technical answer about Santiago's synesthetic genius, but the boy, standing beside him, took a surprising step. He grabbed the microphone, his small hand gripping the heavy object with unexpected firmness. Prejudice had given Santiago his greatest platform. The boy's face was serene, but his eyes, previously full of tenderness, held a deep conviction. He looked directly at the reporter and, in a clear, calm voice, uttered the words that would echo throughout the media. "Because I can feel what you are still trying to learn." The simplicity and depth of the sentence were a knockout blow to cynicism. The auditorium fell into complete silence. Santiago's response was not a defense, but an declaration of moral superiority. He was saying that the real limitation wasn't cognitive, but rather the inability to empathize and see the world with the heart. The boy had exposed the myopia of the rational world and the failure of prejudice. Thessalence. That followed his sentence was deafening, broken only by the clicks of photographers and the shocked gasps of some present. Emilio felt the same pride and emotion he had felt on the plane. That boy was a giant of wisdom, and he had chosen the billionaire as his messenger. The reporter's attack had become the project's greatest moral victory. The moment Santiago's response went viral instantly, becoming a global symbol of the fight against prejudice. His phrase became a slogan of inclusion, countering investor criticism. Emilio, seeing the strength of his young co-founder, realized that capital social off, that project was far more valuable than the financial one. Faith in the heart had silenced the skepticism of the mind. The crisis had passed, and the purpose of the project was stronger than ever. Santiago was not an advertising symbol, he was the moral compass of the company. His voice, once barely a whisper, had become a rallying cry for humanity and inclusion, proving that true intelligence came from the heart. Fragility is the proof of our humanity. Amid the project's meteoric rise and Santiago's moral victory, life cast a sudden shadow over the paradise of Santa Monica. Mateo, the baby who started the entire journey, fell suddenly ill. A serious infection landed him in the hospital, and he was unresponsive to medication. The chaos, previously silenced, returned brutally and desperately, reminding Emilio that life, not technology, was his greatest teacher. The hospital, with its bipeds and its sterile air, was the opposite of Neza's warmth. Emilio, the man in control, felt himself crumble. He looked at his son in the ICU and felt his helplessness return, stronger than on the plane. All the money, all the success, couldn't guarantee Mateo's health. He was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, confronting their inability to protect what was most essential. Camilla was beside him, pale, praying. They tried to calm the baby, but Mateo's cries were now a wail of pain, rejecting his parents' touch. The heart monitor fluctuated alarmingly, and despair set in. It was as if the plane crash had returned, but with a real life-threatening threat. Santiago's absence was painful. Rosa and Santiago, who were in Neza, were alerted by Camilla. Without hesitation, they caught the first flight to Los Angeles. When Santiago arrived at the hospital, his presence brought a subtle relief to the atmosphere. He didn't say much, just approached the crib with a seriousness that belied his age. With the doctor's hesitant permission, Santiago took a small, colorful keyboard, a gift Emilio had given him, for the hospital room. He didn't play complex music, but notes smooth and simple, a rhythmic melody reminiscent of the murmur he used on the plane. It was a sound that came from the bottom of his heart, full of intention and tenderness. The reaction of Mateo, it was immediate. The baby stopped crying and gradually began to calm down. The heart monitor, previously erratic, began to stabilize as gently as the melody filled the room. The doctors watched in disbelief. It was the power of connection, the strength of sound that the baby recognized. Camila, seeing the monitor return to normal, sobbed with relief and gratitude. She looked at Emilio, tears streaming down her face. "He hears your sound, Emilio. He recognizes you. Your song is healing him." Recognizing the voice of the heart, the melody of Santiago, was the antidote that medicine could not offer. Emilio felt the ultimate lesson in humility. He had built app for children, but it was the boy behind the idea who saved his son. Santiago's emotional intelligence, his ability to tune into life, was a healing force that defied logic and science. The crisis had proven that life was more about the melody of the heart than the data of the mind. Mateo began to respond to the medication, now that his soul was at peace. Santiago's music had broken the emotional blockage, allowing the physical healing to proceed. The Arriaga family had been saved once again by Neza's boy, forever cementing their unbreakable bond. The promise was fulfilled. Mateo's recovery was swift, and the project, strengthened by the crisis and the moral victory, moved forward to its launch. In a moving ceremony, broadcast simultaneously between Mexico City and Los Angeles, the educational app was officially launched with the perfect name Voces del Corazón. The duality of the name reflected the bridge built between the two worlds and the essence of the project, the voice of technology guided by the human heart. Emilio, on stage, was more emotional than at any IPO. Santiago, or Global Ambassador for Inclusion, was the star of the event. Alongside Emilio and Camila, he radiated a calm and happiness that infected the audience. App, which used her musical synesthesia to teach logic and coordination, was presented as a revolution for neurodivergent children around the world. It was Neza's dream becoming a global code. During the event, Santiago took the podium for his speech, a moment of expectant silence. He didn't read from a text, he spoke directly from his soul. His voice, previously soft, gained a power of conviction that silenced the thousands of attendees. His message was the culmination of the entire journey, the final response to prejudice. "I am not a genetic error, I am a new way of understanding love," he declared. The phrase was an anthem of empowerment, a poetic rejection of the label of limitation that the world had tried to impose on him. He was transforming his syndrome into a symbol of strength and a richer, more colorful worldview. The crowd in both cities rose in a thunderous ovation. It wasn't just the technological success that was being applauded, but the courage, purity, and humanity that the boy represented. Emilio looked at Rosa, and they shared a moment of pride and profound gratitude. The plain's tears had led to a chorus of global approval. Voices of the Heart became an instant success, not only as an educational tool, but also as a movement for inclusion. Sales and donations surpassed all expectations, and Emilio's logic proved correct. Technology with a soul was infinitely more powerful and profitable. The impact of app was felt in Neza and in LA, uniting communities and proving that difference was, in fact, the greatest source of innovation. Santiago Morales, the boy society tended to ignore, had become a beacon of hope and the architect of a new era of digital empathy. The story of Santiago and Emilio was proof that the greatest wealth lies in human connection and the ability to transform adversity into purpose. The billionaire had found his soul, and the boy, his voice. The app is a success. But what's next? Discover the lasting legacy Emilio is creating to honor his lifelong teacher. Sign up now and prepare for the most exciting chapter yet, where gratitude becomes a global movement. Confession is the pinnacle of healing. The success of Voces del Corazón was not the end, but the beginning of a new legacy. In a moment of profound intimacy and gratitude, Emilio approached Rosa. They were at the new foundation's headquarters, the community center in Neza already under construction, a physical testament to their partnership. Emilio needed to externalize the transformation that had occurred in his heart, to confess the incalculable impact Santiago had had on his life. "Rosa, I have to confess," he began, his voice thick with sincerity. "I've spent my life creating smart machines, striving for perfection in code, in efficiency. I was cold and calculating, and I almost lost my son because of it." He held back tears. The billionaire's vulnerability exposed. His confession was a liberation. "But it was your son, Santiago, who taught me what it means to be human," he continued. "He taught me to sing from the heart, to see the world in color, and to value tenderness. He showed me that the greatest intelligence is ability to love and to connect. He saved me, Rosa, as much as he saved Mateo." Her gratitude was an uncontrollable sea. As a final, lasting act of gratitude and purpose, Emilio created the Santiago Morales program. This program would offer full scholarships for children with disabilities throughout Latin America and the United States, ensuring access to education, art, and technology. The program was a lifelong commitment to inclusion, a legacy that surpassed the life of a single app. Rosa cried, moved to the core. Seeing her son's name, the boy she had fought to protect and educate on the outskirts of Neza, emblazoned on international foundation, it was the greatest honor. It was recognition that his struggle and Santiago's purity had immeasurable value to the world. His son was a catalyst for change. Emilio, the billionaire, had finally found his true legacy. It wasn't his profits or his products, but his ability to transform his own story and use his power to create a more just and humane world, inspired by a boy with Down syndrome. His journey was complete, a friendship. The bond between the two families deepened. Neza and Santa Monica were connected by a bridge of purpose and affection. Rosa became a vital consultant to the foundation, ensuring that the program maintained Neza's authenticity and humility. Santiago was the heart of the project, the billionaire, its messenger. The world now saw Emilio not just as a successful businessman, but as a humanitarian leader. Your story with Santiago became Akasa's study on the power of inclusion in innovation and leadership. The plane's cry had been transformed into Anthem of Empathy Global. The Santiago Morales program was proof that vulnerability could be the greatest strength, and that difference was, in fact, a gift. Neza's lesson for LA was clear. Success without soul is empty, and true wealth is measured by the impact you have on other people's lives. The final silence. 3 years passed. Aeromexico 402 flew peacefully. Emilio and Camila watched Santiago and Mateo, now 4 years old, in a scene that was the antithesis of the beginning of the story. The peace was tangible. The celebration of that legacy of love and resilience would be held at the Hollywood Bowl, one of Los Angeles' most iconic venues. It was the culmination of a story that began with tears and shame and ended with an orchestra of humanity. Santiago, now 18, stood center stage, a mature artist and respected activist. His presence was a beacon. Beside him, Mateo, 4 years old, smiling and tapping percussion with a rhythm that only he and Santiago understood. The baby who cried on the plane was now a happy boy, in harmony with his life teacher. The song Santiago played was a symphony of colors, a complex and moving melody that narrated her journey. It contained the melancholy of tears, the simplicity of touch, and the strength of overcoming. The audience, made up of thousands of program beneficiaries, employees, and friends, was moved. It was the music of life. On the screen, the audience saw the phrase that became Emilio's life philosophy. Every cry carries a song waiting to be understood. It was no longer about silencing the cry, but about listening to it, embracing it, and transforming it into art and purpose. The boy's lesson was now a global maxim. Emilio, in the audience, struggled to hold back tears. He looked at his son and Santiago and saw living proof of his redemption. He was the man who had everything and had found what was essential. His life was proof that a billionaire's greatest wealth is his own, humanity, and the greatest gift, a happy child. The show culminated in an apotheosis of applause. The flight that began with tears and shame ended with an orchestra of love, overcoming, and humanity. Neza's boy had conquered Los Angeles and the billionaire's heart, silencing not the sky, but the world's cynicism. Emilio's life had been rewritten, not by an algorithm, but by pureza of a boy with Down syndrome. The final lesson was clear and resonated in every note of the orchestra. The boy who silenced the sky didn't stop the world from crying. He just taught it to listen. Thank you for following Santiago and Emilio's exciting journey. Remember, true strength lies not in silencing pain, but in transforming it into melody. Your heart has a voice too. Use it. If this story touched your heart and inspired you to see the world with more empathy, Subscribe to our channel now. Like and share this message of inclusion and hope.